Hey everybody, welcome to Drive Thru Review 325. Today we're going to take a look at Pandemic the Cure, which is basically Pandemic the dice game. New release from Z-Man Game, plays 2 to 5 in about a half an hour. And it is also designed by the original designer of Pandemic, Matt Leacock. Now the plot in Pandemic the Cure is the same as in Pandemic. There are 4 diseases spreading across the globe, and players are going to take on a variety of roles and try to cure those diseases before there are too many outbreaks and the infection rate doesn't get too high. Now speaking of roles, there's 7 roles in the game, and players can randomly deal these out or choose them at the start of the game. You've got your familiar roles from the original Pandemic, the medic, the dispatcher, the researcher, and so on. Players will take the role card and put that in front of them, and then they'll take the corresponding dice that match that particular role. And you can see on the roll card the configuration of dice and what the possible outcomes on those dice are, and these different icons are going to allow the player to take different actions on their turn. The first thing players will do is set up the board. You've got a central ring, and around that ring you've got various locations where you're going to be placing dice that represent the various diseases in the game. To start the game, players will put pawns matching the color of their roll card onto the North American location. And then you're going to take and roll 12 infection die from the infection bag and place them out onto the board. So there are 4 different colors of dice, and those represent the various diseases in the game. And you can see each region shows you sort of the likelihood of those particular colors coming out. So you can see here in India, we have likelihood of the red, yellow, and black diseases coming out. And in North America, only the red and blue diseases will come out. And these are determined by the pips available on the dice themselves. So as players cure the diseases in the game, they're going to mark each disease with a die of that color. And once you've marked all 4 colors, you've won the game. So what will a player do on their turn? Well, each turn the players will take their player dice and roll them. And then you're going to do actions based on whatever icons the dice show. These actions can be a variety of things. They like to move around the board, treat disease, possibly get samples to then turn into an actual cure, which is why you're trying to win the game. But the trick with this is you can roll the dice as much as you want. But there's one thing you got to watch out for. Every time you roll one of the hazard symbols, you're going to have to set that die aside, and it is now locked, and you can no longer re-roll it. For each hazard symbol that you roll, you're going to have to increase the infection rate by 1 step. And as the infection rate increases, the players are going to have to roll more and more disease dice at the end of their turn as you move over and jump up various levels. Finally, if the infection rate gets too high, then it's just going to make the players lose the game. Now let's go over the various actions available. First, you have flight, and this allows a player to jump from any region to any other region. Next, you've got sailing, and as you can see here, the dispatcher doesn't even have sailing available on any of their dice. But when you sail, you can only move from one region to an adjacent region. Next, you've got treat, and this allows you to treat one disease in the location you're at, and you take a die and then move that into the treatment center in the center of the board, and this is where you're going to be hopefully collecting samples out of to find a cure. The other thing you can do with the treat disease action is take a die from the treatment center and put it back into the bag. Finally, you have the collect sample action, and from here you can take a die from the treatment center, put it underneath your bottle, and then store it on your player card. And the idea here is to store up multiple dice of the same color to hopefully take a find a cure action. Now after you've taken all your actions, if you're in a region with another player, you can give them some of your samples for them to possibly find a cure on their turn as well. Now if you've got enough samples, you can take the find a cure action, roll all the dice of the matching color from your samples, and if you roll a 13 or higher, and then you're going to go ahead and mark that as a cured disease on the cured disease card. Finally, you're going to have to go into the infection step. You're going to take a look at the current infection rate, draw the number of dice equal to those shown, and then distribute them into the appropriate locations. If you ever have to add a 4th die of the same color to a region where there's already 3 of that color, and then you have an outbreak, you go clockwise around the region tiles and then place the die there. And you're going to increase the outbreak marker. And again, this is another way that you can lose the game, is if you get too many outbreaks, you immediately lose. So in that way, it's exactly like Pandemic, where you can actually have chaining outbreaks. If I have an outbreak here that triggers an outbreak on the next spot, I'm going to move the outbreak marker up that much further. Now the other thing that can happen as the infection rate actually goes up, you're going to have an epidemic. So as you cross the different thresholds along the epidemic track, you're actually going to take all of the dice that you may have in the treatment center, roll those along with extra dice equal to the infection rate, and then redistribute those out onto the board. And so you can have some really nasty turns in this game. Like I said, the game only lasts about 30 minutes, and sometimes this will just cut you right off at the knees. If you get somebody that's really aggressive or really has some bad luck with those hazard dice, and you trip up some epidemics, and then you're just scooping up all of these dice that you just cured and redistributing them, and you're not prepared, you can have multiple triggered outbreaks very easily in this game. Now the game does present to us one counterbalance to this whole epidemic and outbreak catastrophe that's going to be hanging over the players' heads. Now, if you roll crosses during the infection roll at the end of your turn, you're going to place those onto the CDC tile. And at any time during any point of the game, any player can spend these and actually trigger one of 3 event cards that will be face up at all times during the game. So for example, here we can see this one here, remote treatment. It costs 2 dice. So you'll take 2 of the crosses off the CDC tile, and then you execute the effect. In this case, move any 2 infection dice from any region to the treatment center, and then you'll draw a new event card and stick this one under the bottom of the deck. Finally, as I said at the beginning, each roll has a different set of dice, and some of the rolls have unique actions that only they can take. For example, the dispatcher here has a helicopter, and you can place a helicopter when you roll it on your card and sort of save that up later to move people from one region to another. Another example is the medic. They actually have multiple treat disease icons on their die, so you can either roll a die that has 2 or even 3 on there on one face of the die. Okay, so that is how you play the game. Now there's 3 ways you can lose the game. One, if you try to go grab infection dice out of the infection bag and there's none there, then you're going to lose. Or if you get too many outbreaks or the epidemic rate gets too high. Now what do I think of the game? Well, it's a lot like Pandemic, and that's kind of silly to say, but it really reminds me, and it gives me that same sense, that same kind of feel of Pandemic. Now, there's one negative aspect of that. I'll get that out of the way because I am mostly positive on the game. And one is the game can just kind of hose you up. You can just roll like 4 radioactive symbols, and then your epidemic rate is going to go up. You're going to have this explosion, and you're just going to get totally hosed up. Now, the original Pandemic had that same kind of thing. You could just somehow shuffle that deck and just kind of be baked in there. You're going to lose the game. So this doesn't play as long as Pandemic. So Pandemic isn't really that long of a game, so it's not that big of a deal. And I really liken this one more towards a Forbidden Desert, Forbidden Island, in the way that you can lose very quickly, 15 minutes, but you can set up and play it again. You can play this 2, 3, 4 times in a row if you really want to. And that's where I come down on a positive side, is it's very addictive. You can just play, set it up, okay, we lost, okay, let's try again. And it has that whole logistical kind of thing. It's different than Pandemic in that way, but it has that same sense where you're like, okay, I've got these event cards we can use, we can see kind of an outbreak building up over here, but we really need to get a treat for this disease because, you know, we've got some bottled up samples that we're going to use. And so there's a lot to consider. And you maybe go and you have like, okay, I rolled a bottle, I want to save the bottle, but I really want to roll a treat disease because I've got to get one of those colors into the treatment center and get that out. But while you're doing that, you're kind of pushing your luck and you're hoping you don't roll one of those hazard symbols. So that's a cool aspect. That part is very different, the whole push your luck aspect of it. So it's got that whole logistical thing, it's got that sort of sweat and intensity of the loss. So one thing that sort of makes Pandemic be forgiven, and this game be forgiven, is because it beats you up, and sometimes it's out of your hands, which normally is like a deal breaker for me in a game. If I feel like my decisions don't matter, it's a deal breaker. But I think this in Pandemic, you kind of need to lose, because then it makes those wins very satisfying. So when you finally do win this game, then it's going to be very satisfying and very fun. And the roles are cool. You've got a lot of different roles that you can choose from, and the game's going to feel, very sort of, turning dials and pulling levers a little bit different each time you play that way. But it is very addictive. You can whip it out and play it super quickly. And I think that saves my one little thing. And it's almost like it's not a negative. I'm kind of coming down, oh, it's not really a negative, but it just, from the reviewer perspective, you got to be aware of it. Like, you don't want to flip the table because you're like, we just got totally hosed by the dice. But that adds to it. So anyway, so I would recommend this game. I don't know that it's ripe for expansions like the regular Pandemic is, but you know, I could be wrong, right? So very interesting game, very cool game, and I really like the whole push your luck aspect of it. Okay, thanks.